After Maya Silver was fired, Orion Tech did not grieve her absence. There was no collective pause, no whispered acknowledgement of loss, no moment where anyone stopped to ask whether something valuable had been removed too quickly. The organization adapted with uncomfortable speed, as though Maya's presence had been an inconvenience already solved. James' Color ensured the transition was efficient. Within days, Maya's access credentials were deactivated. Her calendar vanished from shared systems. Files she had managed were reassigned without explanation. By the end of the second week, her desk no longer looked abandoned, it looked claimed. A different chair, a new mug, a new name on the internal directory. It was as if she had never existed. James preferred it that way. Absence, when handled correctly, could erase memory, and memory, he knew, was dangerous. When Suzanne walked into the office on her first morning, she felt the tension immediately. It wasn't loud or dramatic. No one shouted, no one argued, but the air itself felt compressed, as if the building were holding its breath. Conversations dropped in volume when supervisors walked past. Laughter sounded clipped, almost rehearsed. People worked with their eyes fixed on screens, shoulders slightly hunched, as though productivity had become a shield. Suzanne adjusted the strap of her modest handbag and waited at reception, rehearsing her smile. She had been warned before she arrived. Jobs were scarce, companies were selective, gratitude mattered, obedience mattered more. She carried those warnings into the building with her, shaping her posture, softening her voice before she spoke. James greeted her with a polite smile that did not reach his eyes. "You'll be assisting me directly," he said, glancing briefly at her resume before setting it aside. "Efficiency is important here, I don't like delays." Suzanne nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." That single response told James everything he needed to know. Suzanne was not Maya. She did not enter the office with quiet confidence or an unspoken understanding of her worth. She entered cautiously, measuring her steps, choosing her words carefully. She asked for clarification before making even the smallest decision. She took notes obsessively, writing down instructions James barely remembered giving. When James corrected her, she apologized immediately, even when the error was clearly not hers. James noticed, and he adapted his management style accordingly. He began giving Suzanne instructions without context. He handed her files without explaining their purpose. Deadlines appeared suddenly, sometimes contradicting earlier timelines. When Suzanne hesitated, even briefly, James sighed loudly or glanced at his watch, a wordless reminder that hesitation was a flaw and replacement was easy. Suzanne responded the only way she knew how. She worked harder. She arrived early and left late. She skipped lunch more often than not. She checked and rechecked documents she was allowed to see, unaware of what had already been altered upstream. She tried to anticipate James's expectations, to read his moods, to prevent mistakes before they occurred. But James controlled what she was allowed to see. Reports passed through him before going anywhere else. Emails were reviewed, revised, sometimes rewritten. Information moved upward only after being filtered through James's interpretation of events. It looked like leadership. It was control. The office atmosphere changed in subtle but significant ways. Where Maya had once been a stabilizing presence, Suzanne became a symbol of caution. Under Maya, issues were addressed early. Problems were spoken aloud before they grew teeth. When James made questionable decisions, Maya had challenged him professionally, never loudly, never disrespectfully, but firmly enough to force accountability. Suzanne did none of that. Not because she didn't notice the problems, but because fear shaped every decision she made. As weeks passed, James's misconduct grew bolder. Without resistance, blame became fluid. When projects stalled, responsibility drifted downward. When numbers failed to align, carelessness was implied. When clients complained, James cited junior oversight with calm confidence. Suzanne absorbed it all silently. She nodded when criticized. She apologized when accused. She learned quickly that defending herself, even politely, earned her a sharp look or a dismissive comment. Silence, she realized, was safer than explanation. James enjoyed the contrast. In meetings, he spoke confidently, often referencing the chaos before Rustructyung, a phrase that landed like an accusation without naming its target. He presented himself as the stabilizing force, the manager who had restored order after dysfunction. Because Suzanne never contradicted him, his narrative remained intact. And narratives James knew were power. Helen watched from a comfortable distance. She visited occasionally, her presence always ultung the atmosphere. She didn't interfere much, she didn't need to. From her perspective, the situation had resolved itself neatly. Maya was gone. Suzanne posed no threat. There was nothing about the new assistant, no sharp intelligence, no quiet authority that might attract Victor's attention. Helen felt secure. But security built on silence is fragile. Suzanne began noticing small inconsistencies within her first month. Documents she submitted would return altered. Numbers she distinctly remembered verifying were suddenly different. Paragraphs appeared under her name that she did not recall writing. When she tried to ask about changes, James brushed her off. "You must be mistaken," he said once, barely looking up from his screen. "Just be more careful next time." Shame burned in her chest. She nudged, apologizing automatically. At first she blamed herself. She told herself she was inexperienced, still adjusting, still learning. She convinced herself that this was how high-pressure corporate environments worked, that mistakes were part of the process, that she simply needed to try harder. But the pattern continued, and the accusations grew more severe. Client dissatisfaction increased. Internal confusion spread quietly. James responded by tightening control further. Daily updates became mandatory. Deadlines shortened. Criticism became public, framed as mentorship. Suzanne's confidence eroded slowly, then all at once. One afternoon she paused near the break room, waiting for the coffee machine to finish. Two colleagues stood nearby, speaking in low voices. "Things were smoother when Maya was here," one said quietly. "Yeah," the other replied, "but look what happened to her." Suzanne froze. Neither of them noticed her standing there, neither looked at her, but the words stayed with her long after they walked away. That night, Suzanne stayed late again. James had instructed her to clean up old archived folders, calling them unnecessary clutter. Alone in the office, surrounded by the low hum of machines and fluorescent lights, she scrolled through directories methodically. That was when she saw it. A folder labeled with Maya's name. She hesitated. Opening it felt like crossing an invisible line, but curiosity, mixed with confusion and growing fear, pushed her forward. She opened the first document, then the second, then the third. Suzanne's breath caught. The files were immaculate. Reports were thorough, structured carefully, submitted ahead of deadlines. Comments reflected foresight and clarity. There were no careless errors, no inconsistencies, no signs of incompetence. She compared them with recent reports. The difference was undeniable. Her hands trembled as understanding crept in. Maya hadn't failed. She had been dismantled. Suddenly, every accusation James had made felt rehearsed. Every mistake blamed on assistants felt intentional. Suzanne realized she wasn't simply an obedient employee filling a vacancy. She was a buffer, a shield, a disposable layer between James and accountability. Fear settled deep in her chest. She closed the folder carefully, logged out, and left the office without turning on the lights. That night sleep refused to come. Every instruction replayed in her mind. Every apology felt like surrender. From that moment on, Suzanne carried knowledge instead of confusion. And knowledge was heavier. She continued working as she always had, quiet, careful, obedient. She followed James's instructions precisely. She smiled when addressed. She apologized when blamed. But internally something fundamental had shifted. She observed. She noticed how James positioned himself in meetings, speaking before others could contribute. How he summarized conversations selectively, omitting details that didn't serve him. How he referred to assistants as support staff, reinforcing hierarchy subtly but constantly. He was no longer just incompetent. He was deliberate. James sensed the change before he could articulate it. Projects weren't running as smoothly as he'd expected. Errors surfaced more frequently. Deep down he knew why. Maya had once corrected mistakes before they reached him. Suzanne didn't, because she wasn't allowed to. James compensated the only way he knew how. By tightening control. He demanded daily reports. He insisted on reviewing every email. He criticized Suzanne publicly, framing it as guidance, ensuring everyone understood where blame would land. Suzanne absorbed it silently, but she was no longer unaware. Helen visited unexpectedly one afternoon. Her presence snapped the office into rigid order. "You're getting sloppy," she said to James once the door was closed. Victor had questions, delays had been noticed, complaints had reached him. James dismissed her concerns, insisting it was a junior staff issue. Helen's gaze hardened. "That's what you said about Maya." The name lingered like a warning. Suzanne felt Helen's attention more often after that visit. Casual questions, polite concern, loyalty framed as virtue, the word itself lingered uncomfortably. That evening, Suzanne reopened Maya's archived files, this time with intention. She studied revision histories and timestamps carefully. Patterns emerged clearly now. Edits were consistently made after submission. By James. Suzanne began saving copies, screenshots, logs. Each action felt dangerous. Each file stored felt like stepping closer to a cliff. James noticed her change. She still obeyed, but her silence had weight now. He tested her loyalty, asking her to resend altered documents, to delete email threads, to comply without explanation. She complied outwardly. Internally, resolve hardened. During a conference call with Victor, James presented progress confidently. Victor asked a simple question about consistency. James glanced at Suzanne. She confirmed the numbers. James relaxed. Something inside Suzanne broke. That night she cried in her car, not from guilt but clarity. Silence, she realized, was not neutrality. It was participation. She began preparing carefully, documenting everything, practicing how to explain facts without accusation, without emotion. When James accused her publicly during a departmental meeting, fear finally loosened its grip. That evening, Suzanne emailed Victor. She did not accuse. She did not attach evidence. She asked if he was willing to review facts. Then she waited. Victor did not respond immediately. The waiting was unbearable. Every vibration of her phone made Suzanne's heart leap. Every unexpected glance from James felt heavier. He had begun to notice the difference in her posture, in the way she typed, in the subtle hesitation before executing instructions. He could not explain it, but the atmosphere had changed. Something had shifted, and he sensed it. 2 days later, Victor arrived at headquarters. His presence was quiet but undeniably commanding. Employees straightened, emails went unanswered until his glance passed over them. He did not need to shout. The weight of his attention carried authority. James felt exposed. For the first time in years, he experienced the vulnerability of having his actions examined without the buffer of obsequience. Victor called meetings back to back. Files were requested. Records were cross-checked. Questions came slowly, deliberately. Silence filled the gaps, forcing James to stumble over his own justifications. Every explanation he attempted was met with documents that contradicted him, earlier, unaltered versions showing meticulous work, timestamps proving his edits, internal communications exposing the narrative he had carefully built. "You altered these reports after submission," Victor said calmly during one session. The statement itself carried no emotion, yet it felt like a hammer striking the foundation of James's control. James tried to deflect. "Adjustments are normal," he said, voice tight. "These were not adjustments, these were manipulations," Victor replied. James glanced toward the door, expecting Helen to intervene. She did not. She sat stiffly, realization dawning that proximity to power had not protected her. Her confidence faltered. Victor then asked about Maya. James hesitated. That single pause revealed more than he intended. Maya arrived the next day, stepping into an office that had been transformed by the tension of scrutiny. The same hallways, the same desks, but the air was lighter, more honest. She carried herself with quiet authority. Clarity had replaced the confusion and humiliation she had endured. She spoke with precision, presenting patterns of misconduct, evidence and timing, leaving no room for argument based on memory or interpretation. Victor listened, absorbing the evidence calmly. When Maya detailed James's behavior, including inappropriate confessions during her suspension, Victor's expression shifted subtly. "This crossed beyond misconduct. This was abuse of power," he said. James tried to interrupt. Victor raised his hand, silencing him without a word. Helen attempted a final appeal, framing her involvement as concern and loyalty, hoping to sway Victor. He listened, then concluded, "You enabled this and you benefited from it." Her access was revoked that day. Suzanne's resignation arrived shortly after. Brief, precise, she had done what she needed to do, integrity had been chosen over fear. Victor understood without comment. James was removed formally, quietly, but irrevocably. There was no ceremony, no explanation, just consequences. Maya was offered reinstatement. She declined. Some workplaces, she understood, were not worth re-entering. She walked away stronger, her name restored and her truth intact. Orion Tech began the long process of healing. James's absence was a shockwave, forcing the company to confront weak internal controls, lack of accountability, and a culture of silence. Employees were cautiously optimistic. Some feared retaliation, but many recognized the opportunity to reset expectations, to rebuild a workplace where competence was valued over fear. Helen, stripped of influence, moved silently to protect herself. She could no longer maneuver as before, and her career within Orion Tech stalled. The realization that proximity to power does not guarantee immunity left her wary, calculating, and reflective. Suzanne, having endured months of fear and observation, stepped away from the corporate world temporarily. She reflected on what she had learned. Obedience could protect in the short term, but it could not shield one from the consequences of corruption. She had documented truth, preserved evidence, and allowed it to surface at the right time. In doing so, she discovered strength within herself she had not known existed. She walked away quietly, with confidence that her integrity had made a difference, and with the knowledge that one person's vigilance could undo years of manipulation. Maya's life continued on a trajectory of purpose and clarity. She sought opportunities that valued transparency, competence, and respect. She became an advocate in professional circles, counseling others about corporate politics, warning them about the subtle erosion of fairness, and teaching the value of documenting work meticulously. The injustice she endured became fuel, shaping her future endeavors and instilling resilience. James Kohler, by contrast, faced professional ostracization. Former allies quietly distanced themselves. Reputation, carefully cultivated over years, crumbled under the weight of revealed misconduct. Job offers that might have once seemed attainable disappeared. Legal and corporate scrutiny left his career in ruins. His arrogance, once a tool, had become the architect of his downfall. Victor, having overseen the investigation and witnessed the courage of Suzanne and the evidence of Maya, reinforced policies at Orion Tech. Whistleblower protocols were strengthened. Supervisory oversight became standard. Processes were realigned to prevent manipulation of reports, to encourage clarity and transparency, and to ensure that no single individual could control narratives to the detriment of the company or employees. Lessons were internalized not only as operational safeguards, but as moral imperatives. The employees, having experienced the extremes of control, fear, and eventual justice, emerged with a new perspective. Fear no longer dictated behavior. Competence and integrity were once again recognized as pillars of the company culture. Conversations became honest, collaboration re-emerged, and mistakes were addressed as opportunities for improvement rather than vehicles for blame. Months later, during an informal gathering in the refurbished break room, Suzanne and Maya spoke quietly. They shared their perspectives, the paths they had navigated, and the choices they had made. Both recognized that silence, while sometimes necessary, could not replace action when injustice prevailed. Their decisions had altered the course of multiple careers and the integrity of the organization itself. Reflecting on the entire ordeal, each person drew different lessons. Maya learned that truth, when documented and presented with clarity, carried power far beyond immediate perception. Suzanne realized that courage could manifest quietly, through observation, patience, and precise action. Victor understood that authority is meaningless without accountability, and that vigilant oversight is essential. James and Helen confronted the consequences of unchecked ambition and the false security of silence. In the end, Orion Tech survived and adapted, but it bore the marks of lessons learned the hard way. The scars were both visible and invisible, improved systems and policies on one hand, and an enduring memory of fear, control, and courage on the other. It was a reminder that workplace culture is fragile, and that silence in the face of incompetence and manipulation enables decay. Maya's departure was quiet, dignified. Suzanne left with her integrity intact. James's removal was definitive and irreversible. Helen's influence waned. Victor restored order and accountability. And the employees of Orion Tech returned to their roles with cautious optimism, equipped with a deeper understanding of professional responsibility and moral clarity. The final reflection lingered for everyone. The most dangerous workplaces are not merely those with loud or tyrannical leaders. They are those where competence is feared, manipulation is invisible, and silence becomes the default response. Courage, documentation, and integrity were the antidotes. They were what restored truth, punished misconduct, and preserved dignity. And so the office moved forward, not as it had before, but wiser, tempered by the experience of betrayal, observation, courage, and eventual justice. What had once been a tale of control and fear became a story of accountability, resilience, and the enduring strength of truth. For those listening or reading, the lesson is clear. Vigilance matters. Obedience alone does not protect you. Integrity is costly, but its value far exceeds the temporary comfort of compliance. Documentation, observation, courage, and timely action can dismantle the most carefully built lies. Silence is complicity. Courage restores balance. Integrity preserves self-respect. And sometimes one person's choice to act is enough to reset an entire system. For YouTube narration, this story closes with reflection. In professional life, pay attention, document carefully, and act when necessary. Systems can be corrupted, leadership can fail, but truth remains the ultimate arbitrator. The choices of Meyer and Suzanne remind us that fear can be overcome, manipulation exposed, and justice, though delayed, is never denied to those willing to act. Thank you for watching this corporate thriller. If Suzanne's courage inspired you, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. Do you know someone who's ever faced injustice at work? Let us know below. For more gripping stories of truth, resilience, and moral courage, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that challenges, surprises, and inspires. Remember, silence may protect you temporarily, but courage changes everything.